If you have your Bibles today, turn them to Luke chapter 21. Luke chapter 21. Y'all think we'll make it through the book of Luke this year? We have, after today, we've got 22, 23, 24. We've got 3 chapters left. And we have, a few weeks left, but we also, around Christmas, want to have an Advent series, so we'll see. It's going to be cutting it close. Luke chapter 21. This is a chapter I think that is it's a little bit difficult. It's a tough chapter. There's a lot of variation of belief and interpretation from this chapter, and we've kind of touched on this subject a little bit before, but the chapter opens with verses 1 through 4. A widow in the temple makes an offering and springboards into a teaching from Jesus. Luke 21, verses 1 through 4. Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box, and he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on." That story really doesn't have much to do with the rest of the chapter, but what it does is it springboards a discussion into in which Jesus is looking at the temple and he's predicting some things that are going to happen. Okay, it springboards into a discussion about a very serious topic. Now, the discussion that takes place, or the teaching that takes place in chapter 21, really there are 2 main thoughts. There's probably more than 2 main thoughts. But basically, you either believe that Luke chapter 21 is talking about the second coming of Christ, or you believe that Luke chapter 21 is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And some people believe that it's both. This is talking about both. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. If you recall, about a month ago, we talked about Jesus' prophetic words concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. He brought this up in an earlier chapter. And this serious and foreboding section of Scripture continues that discussion. Okay? So there was a little bit of a pause. He continues that discussion. Now, how many of you recently, because of events going around in the world, how many of you have heard someone say something like, "Oh, there's stuff going on in the world over in the Middle East, the end is near"? Have y'all heard people say that? You may have heard pundits on the news and lots of different people, especially now that we have the internet and social media. Everybody can put their opinion out there for people to hear. Okay? Literally anybody can post anything they want to. You probably have heard a lot about that. And one of the reasons for that is passages like this. But I want us to remember a few things from a few weeks ago that we talked about. Okay? I want us to remember a few things. If you weren't here, hopefully this will get you up to speed. I want you to remember that the Bible often uses a genre of literature called apocalyptic literature. Okay? Often uses a genre of literature called apocalyptic literature. If you were to read the book of Revelation, for instance, that is apocalyptic literature. Okay? It is not, it's a type of literature, it's not intended to be read literally. All right? It is a particular kind of literature. Maybe similar to the idea today of, if you were to read some sort of poetry, it's not intended to be read literally. It's an emotional piece of writing. Okay? Apocalyptic literature is found in the Bible. We're going to be going to Daniel chapter 7 in just a little bit. That is sort of like the quintessential apocalyptic literature in the Bible is Daniel chapter 7. This is one of those times. This is called a gospel apocalypse. Luke chapter 21 is. It's called the gospel apocalypse. And here's what that means. The events described in this chapter will be an earth-shaking action on the part of God to come in judgment against His enemies and in the salvation of His people. Okay? That's what apocalyptic literature is. It is often very, very symbolic language that's used to describe an act of God coming down and rescuing his people. Okay? It's found throughout the Bible that God is going to shake heaven and earth, and he's going to come down and he's going to rescue his people. It happened in Daniel chapter 7. It's talked about in the New Testament. And what happens is many people do not understand that that is a genre of biblical literature, and they take it literally. Okay? So, for instance, a few years ago, there was a very popular pastor who was talking about the blood moons. Do you remember that a few years ago? Okay? There's going to be a blood moon, and that means that the end is coming, and it's going to be soon. And the reason that he did that was because he read these passages in the Bible that were apocalyptic literature, and he said, well, that's going to happen, literally. Well, I think we need to slow down a little bit. This is a type of literature that's meant to tell a group of people God is going to act. He's going to shake heaven and earth to make sure that he brings justice on your behalf. And that is one of these passages in Luke chapter 21. So this also means that the event described may not be describing the end of the world specifically, but is one of many signposts that point to the final day of the Lord. So these apocalyptic visions that people often have in the Bible, they sound like the end of the world. If you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about it's the end of the world as we know it, okay? As they knew it, it would be the end of their world, and something new would come after it. And so these apocalyptic visions, that's what they are meant to do. They're meant to say, God's going to change things. God's going to change things. He's going to make things better. All right, so these passages often sound like the end of the world. They sound like they're talking about the second coming of Christ. And ultimately, they're pointing to the second coming of Christ. That ultimately one day Christ will return and all of God's people will be vindicated and all of God's enemies will be destroyed and overcome. Okay, so these apocalyptic visions in our Bible, they aren't specifically always talking about the second coming of Christ, the very end of things, but they are at the very least pointing toward them. So I think when you read in the Scriptures, and you're going to find out in just a minute when we read these passages, you read in the Scriptures and you read there's going to be signs and there's going to be warnings and there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. People have often taken that and they've said, every time there's a war, oh, this could be it. This could be the time that the Lord is coming. And oftentimes they predict, oh, the Lord's going to be coming, this is going to be it. And then what happens? He doesn't come. And people get disappointed. These apocalyptic visions are meant to point to the end, not to be literally about the end of time. So let's jump into this text. With that in mind, let's look at what Jesus specifically says about the destruction of Jerusalem and the coming of the Son of Man, and also what lessons we can learn about the future day of the Lord when Christ will come in final judgment and vindication. So, verse 5 is where we're going to be starting. And we're going to notice in verses 5 through 9 that Jesus foretells the destruction of the temple. Okay? So, remember, he's at the temple. He's watched this lady put in her money at the temple. While some were speaking of the temple, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, he said, as for these things that you see, the days will come when there will not be left here one stone standing upon another that will not be thrown down. And they asked him, Teacher, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? And he said, See that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he. And the time is at hand. Do not go after them. And when you hear of the wars and tumults, do not be terrified, for these things must first take place, but the end will not be at once. Okay, so clearly, they're looking at the temple. They're talking about how beautiful the temple. And Jesus says, you see those stones that you're saying are beautiful? There will come a day when those stones will no longer be on top of each other. They will no longer be built into a temple. Okay? He's not talking about the second coming of Christ. He's talking about a specific thing that would happen within 40 years of him saying those things. Okay? AD 70, the Roman armies came and they destroyed Jerusalem, and the temple was one of those things that they destroyed. All right. Then Jesus foretells wars and persecutions of the early church. Notice verse 10. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes and in various places famines and pestilences. And there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons. And you will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake. This will be your opportunity to bear witness. Settle it therefore in your minds, not to meditate beforehand how to answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which none of your adversaries will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be delivered up even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and some of you they will put to death. You will be hated by all for my name's sake, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance you will gain your lives. Now, has he switched subjects? No, he's still talking about the same thing. He's still talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. He's still talking about that temple falling down. And that they'll know when that time comes because there will be wars and rumors of wars. They're going to be able to look out and see the Roman army coming. They're going to be able to see it happen. Let me just try and help us think about this, okay? I think sometimes, y'all have heard me say this before, but I think sometimes when we read the Bible, we just sort of read it sort of like it just fell out of the sky and hit us in the head today. But the Bible had an original audience, okay? It had an original audience. And so when Jesus is saying, this will happen to you and you will do this, he's not necessarily talking to you and me. Now, there's a lesson in that for us that we'll talk about in a minute. But he had specific people that he was actually saying that to. This will happen. Be ready for it. He's talking to his disciples very specifically. There's going to be wars and rumors of wars, and it was going to be a time of pestilence. The Roman Empire came through and basically just wiped everything. They wiped everything. Then Jesus foretells the destruction of Jerusalem. He foretells the destruction of Jerusalem. He talked about the temple. He talked about the rumors and the wars and the persecution of the early church. Now he's going to talk about Jerusalem. Notice verses 20 through 24. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out and in the country enter it. For these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. Alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, for there will be great distress upon the earth and wrath against this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. All right, so what he's saying is, look, when these things start to happen, when you see the Romans coming and you're out in the field and you're working, don't go back in Jerusalem. Okay, don't do that. Don't go back to Jerusalem. All right, it would be like today. If you see a tornado coming, or if there's a fire happening on your house, don't run into your house. Okay, the fire's in your house. Don't run into your house. Don't go in there. Stay outside. Okay, outside is where the safety is. Run away. Don't run back into Jerusalem because Rome is coming and you'll get captured there. I'm told that there were many, many Christians who escaped Jerusalem in AD 70 because they heeded the warnings of Jesus. They did not go back into Jerusalem. They saw these things coming because they heeded the warnings of Jesus. Be ready for that. Now, verses 25 through 28, this is where I think people get a little mixed up. Because maybe verses 25 through 28, they maybe sound like he's switching subjects. Like he was talking about this thing that was going to happen within 40 years. He was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, but now he's going to change subjects. And because it's using this apocalyptic language that we talked about. Okay, the wars and the blood and the sky and the earthquakes, that makes it sound like the end of the world. But that is just a particular kind of literature. All right, so let's look at this. It's a particular kind of literature that basically says God is going to change things. He's going to come and rescue his people. Notice verses 25 through 28. And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth distress of nations and perplexity because of the roaring of the seas and the waves. People fainting with fear and with foreboding of what is coming on the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And when these things begin to take place, straighten up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. I'll be honest. That sounds like the second coming of Christ, doesn't it? Okay? Specifically the phrase, the Son of Man coming in a cloud. I mean, that sounds like the second coming of Christ. But I want to submit to you today, and really this doesn't matter. If you think that's talking about the second coming of Christ, it's not like that's going to, change the fact that you're a Christian or something. Okay? I mean, this is a difficult passage for us to understand. God's not expecting us to understand this perfectly as a checklist for getting to heaven. Okay, that's not the case. You can go on believing that. I'm submitting to you my studied conviction, but that's all that it is. I want to suggest to you that this passage is an apocalyptic passage that points back to Daniel chapter 7. And we'll go there and look at that in just a minute, because we need to answer the question, what is the coming of the Son of Man? What is the coming of the Son of Man? Now, many of you, if you have a Bible that has either maybe it has some footnotes, or maybe it has like the center column reference. Do you guys have a Bible like that? Where in the center column it shows you references to other Bible passages that correspond to that verse. So for me, for like verse, let's see, where is it? For verse 27, where it talks about the Son of Man coming in a cloud, if you look at the center column reference on your Bible at verse 27, it's going to tell you that that is a reference to Daniel chapter 7. Okay? That's not a new thing. This is the coming of the Son of Man is something that Jews understood. All right, so we need to, in order to understand this, we need to go back to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. So I hope you'll mark your place at Luke 21. Mark your place at Luke 21. Go back to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. I hear a few pages turning. I'm like the old man. I remember the old days when you could hear people's pages turning whenever they turned in the Bible. Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 18. This is where this idea of the Son of Man coming on a cloud, that's where this comes from. So I'm going to read this real fast, 1 through 18. Y'all follow along and listen and see if it doesn't sound like what Luke is saying in Luke chapter 21. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw in a dream and visions of his head as he lay in bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. Okay, he's going to go through and describe each one of the beasts. The beasts correspond to different nations. Okay, different nations. Verse 7, let's drop down to verse 7. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, it was this horn. In this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. All right? So he's describing these nations. They're beasts. Okay? They're savage beasts. And he's describing world powers of the time. And this final beast, I think specifically this final beast that he's referring to right here is probably Greece. Okay? That's ruling ruling them at this time. They've come back from captivity when this was written. They've come back from Babylonian captivity. And this would have been given to encourage them because Greece was ruling and they weren't really free. All right? And this was an apocalyptic vision that was written to encourage them that God was going to change things because they eventually would become free from Greece. Now, Rome would come in later, but they would be free from Greece. Notice verse 9. And as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. That sound like a book of the Bible that you've read before in the New Testament? Revelation. Sounds just like it. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. And I saw in the night visions, verse 13, and behold, with the clouds of heaven. All right, remember what our passage in Luke 21 said, the Son of Man coming in the clouds? Okay. Behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and he was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, and all peoples and nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. What this is talking about, the vision of the Son of Man, is that God would take his throne as the king of the universe, and he would care for his people and for the people of his kingdom. And so when the Jews in the late Old Testament century, okay, in the late BCs, when the Jews were struggling and hurting, these words encouraged them. God is going to take his throne, and he is going to fix what's going wrong. Okay? Now, fast forward to the time in between the death of Jesus and the time of AD 70 when Rome comes and destroys the temple. What's happening to God's people? They're being persecuted. Who are they being persecuted by? Not Rome yet. They will be persecuted by Rome soon. But it's not Rome they're being persecuted by. Who are they being persecuted by? It's the Jews. Okay, Saul, before he became Paul and he was converted to Christ, he was pulling people out of their homes and he was sending them to jail. And once he became a Christian, the Jews were persecuting him. They were whipping him and beating him and hurting him. And the Jews are trying to seed false doctrine into the church, and there's all kinds of persecution going on. And so what Luke does is he takes a theme from the book of Daniel and he says, hey, you know how this was encouraging to them? That God was going to come on his throne and he was going to do something about it? Well, I'm going to say this to you. That God's going to do something about this persecution that you're experiencing. And we know as historical fact, God did do something. Jerusalem was flattened by Rome. Flattened. And so when you read in Luke chapter 21, the Son of Man coming in the cloud, that sounds like the second coming of Christ. It surely points to the second coming of Christ, when God will vindicate everybody and everything. But I think specifically in this passage, in Luke chapter 21, it is an understanding of Jewish literature that it would be encouraging to people who understood that literature. This was comforting for the people of God to hear that God was going to be sitting on his throne, that Jesus, the Son of Man, would be sitting on his throne, and that he would do something. Today, when things are bad in our world, do you ever just think, God, I wish you would just reach down your hand and do something? All the time. God, I wish that you would shake heaven and earth and stop these people that are doing this. I wish that you would stop this horrible disease that's killing people. No doubt you have a loved one that suffered from something and you wish that it would stop. No doubt you've got something going on in your life that you wish would stop, that would go away, that you wouldn't have to deal with anymore. And so you would long for God from His throne to look down and have mercy upon you and shake heaven and earth and take that thing away. These are the words that encouraged first century Jews. We don't speak like this anymore, and so we misunderstand it. We misunderstand it. But that's what he's talking about. God was going to have mercy on His church and stop the persecution that was happening to them. But I want to submit to you today that just because this might be talking about something that happened in AD 70, almost 2,000 years ago, just because this might be happening then, does not mean that it has no meaning for us. Because, as I said, these apocalyptic visions that people have of God shaking heaven and earth, they are all signposts. They're all, see Rock City? You know the See Rock City sign? Okay? You all seen them, right? You get anywhere with like in a 100-mile radius of Chattanooga, Tennessee, what do you see? Sides of barns, out in fields somewhere, you'll see a big sign that says See Rock City. Well, you wouldn't go to the sign and be like, oh, I saw Rock City. It was great. Okay? You would let those signs point you to what? To Rock City. See, these apocalyptic visions, they all point to the final day when Jesus will vindicate His people. And they will see heaven, where God will wipe away every tear. And God will bring His new heavens and new earth. They all point to that. And so I want us, as we conclude today, to learn the lesson of the fig tree. Learn the lesson of the fig tree, verses 29 through 38. He told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they come out in leaf, you see for yourselves, you know that the summer is already near. So, also, when you see these things taking place, this is still a lesson for them. When you see these things taking place, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Okay? In other words, God is taking His throne and ruling on His throne and shaking heaven and earth for His people. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all has taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And he says in verse 34, but watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the cares of this life, and that day come upon you suddenly like a trap. For it will come upon all who dwell on the face of the whole earth. But stay awake at all times, praying that you may have strength to escape all these things that are going to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. And every day he was teaching in the temple, but at night he went out and lodged on the mount called Olivet. And early in the morning all the people came to him in the temple to hear him. Learn the lesson of the fig tree. The Scriptures teach the second coming of Christ is going to come like a thief in the night. Okay, there aren't going to be major signs. It's going to happen, and we're not going to know that it's happening. And so we need to always be ready. And I want to use from this text, I want to use this statement, for it will come upon all who dwell on the face of the whole earth. I want to use that to springboard into talking about there will come a day when all people will see the coming of the Son of Man. When all of those signposts point toward the ultimate coming of the Son of Man, there will come that day. So how can we be prepared for it? How can we learn the lesson of the fig tree? In the Scriptures, we have all these signposts pointing toward it. So how can we be ready for that second coming of Christ? And follow the signposts. I want to give you about 6 little things from the text that we've just read, maybe 6 little principles for being ready. Number 1, give it your all, like the widow in the temple. I don't think that the widow in the temple really had much to do with this whole passage, except that it got Jesus talking about the temple. But we can take a lesson from her life. Give it your all. Give it your all. Do your best and forget the rest. as I say to my kids a lot. Do your best and forget the rest. Give it your all. Don't be caught by the second coming of Christ not being the person that God wants you to be and expects you to be. Give it your all. Number 2, don't be fooled or afraid. Don't be fooled or afraid. And he tells them this in talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. He tells them this in verses 8 and 9. He says, when you hear of the wars and tumults, do not be terrified, for these things must first take place, but the end will not be at once. Do not be fooled. Do not be afraid. Don't be worried about the second coming of Christ. You know why? Because you stand with Jesus. Because you're on the Lord's side. Don't be worried about it. Don't be afraid about it. In fact, found in verse 22, in fact, verses 27 through 28, we need to look for Jesus' coming and be ready for it and be excited about it. When He comes, He's going to make all things new. I'm not going to be bald anymore. Okay? He's going to make all things new, and it's going to be great. Keep on witnessing. Number 3, keep on witnessing. He told them, when these things happen, it's going to be your opportunity to be a witness. Keep on witnessing. Tell people about the Lord and warn them that this day will come eventually. Number 4, trust God's word. I think that because most of us are lived our lives and people have predicted the second coming of Christ over and over again, and it hasn't happened, and this happens over and over and over again, and you know, people expect this to come, and you know, people waiting on their housetop, and you know, all of that kind of stuff. People have been expecting this thing over and over again, and when it doesn't come, we sort of get like a cry wolf thing. The boy who cried wolf. And I think a lesson for us today is don't do that. Keep trusting God's word. This will happen, and we ought to be ready for it. And look for Jesus' coming. Be ready for it. Be expectant for it. And then, finally, keep listening to Jesus. While we wait on the Lord to return, while we wait on that day when He will take away our tears and our pains and our sorrows and our difficulties, while we wait for that day of final vindication, that day where God will finally shake heaven and earth so that there will be a new heaven and a new earth, that day that we all look forward to and long for. While we wait, keep listening to Jesus. As the end of chapter 21 says, He kept coming to the temple to teach, and people kept coming to listen to Him. Keep listening to Jesus and His word and His teaching for you. I want to offer you an invitation today. An invitation to make sure that your calling and election is sure. To make sure that you're ready for this. Because while this may be talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, as we've said, it points to the second coming of Christ, and we ought to be ready. It could happen. It will come as a thief in the night, the Scriptures say. I want you to be ready. Don't be caught unaware, not ready for it. Don't think that, I'll get things on track tomorrow. I'll get things on track next month. Next month will be way better. You know, life is just kind of crazy right now. I've got a lot going on. I've got a lot of stuff going on. I just really don't have the time. I'll get it on track next month. No. That's not being ready. Let's get ready today. Let's be ready today. And then if we're ready today and we're ready tomorrow and the next day and the next day, every day we can look forward to the coming of Christ as something that's a blessing and not as a scary thing. I want to offer you this invitation. We're going to sing a song. If you need to do something, if you need to take care of something, if you need prayers, if you need someone to come up and hug you and care for you, if you need Bible study, whatever it is that you need, this time is for you. You can come sit on one of these front pews, talk to one of our elders in the back, or reach out to me privately at another time. Whatever it is that you need, don't hesitate. Come now as we stand and as we sing.